Well, folks, there is something called the red pill movement. It's sort of a far-right movement that focuses in on saying the unsayable, and now many of the red-pilled have taken the position that it's bad for men to get married. A fascinating debate has broken out about the value of marriage. It's really interesting. So there are a bunch of people on the so-called red-pilled right who have now suggested that marriage is bad for men, that men should not get married.
Ben Shapiro takes on the red pill. Is the red pill any match for facts and logic? Let's find out. What's he got for us? What's he got in store?
Now, the case that they're making is not the liberal feminist case that basically men are useless and terrible and a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle or anything like that. The case that they are making is that the stakes of marriage have been changed by things like no-fault divorce, custody arrangements, the child support payments and all the rest, spousal support, that basically the legal regimen has made it not a bargain for men to get married. Now, I agree with the critique of all of those policies. I think no-fault divorce is a disaster area. I think that the child custody arrangements that basically always go to mom no matter what, that is a serious problem. When you shift the incentive structure, there's a reason why the majority of divorces, the vast majority of divorces are now initiated by women. That is not because in the past, women were wildly abused and today they are wildly liberated. What that really is when you shift the incentive structure and it turns out that all the risk is now taken by men, women are going to be the ones who actually activate and push that divorce button. However, the red-pilled have taken it one step further, and now they're telling young men, you should not get married. It's too dangerous to get married. Don't get married.
I mean, there's a 50% chance it's going to end in divorce. You better have a very good reason for wanting to send men into the meat grinder.
That's foolish. That's foolish. So let's go through some of these arguments because they become very popular on the right. So let's start with Pearl Davis. So Pearl Davis is an anti-feminist who has become pretty popular these days. A lot of people label her sort of a female Andrew Tate, although without the checkered past. And here is Pearl Davis talking about marriage.
The Tradcons, Daily Wire conservatives are saying that Pearl's just a doom and gloomer who lies about stats, just focuses on the negatives, never the positives, and all the men complaining are just crybabies. And so one day he comes home and he finds out that his wife had called the police on him and told them that the first time they hooked up 10 years ago, he had quote unquote raped her. And the truth of the matter is, when a man has children, they're not his kids. A man has no way to have children and those kids be actually his. They're always hers because the courts give the women custody 90% of the time, and rich men are really the only ones that have the money to fight it and the time. So I ask the Daily Wire, Jeremy Boeing, Matt Walsh, is this just crybabies? Are they just they're crybaby, weak men who don't man up and want to risk that? So, it's interesting because instead of demanding that the laws change and demanding women face repercussions for doing this stuff, you guys demand that men need to step up and take part in a system that discriminates against them. You say, oh, find a girl that prays, she won't do it. And I had this thought too, until I found a Muslim girl that did the same thing. I found a Christian girl that did the same thing. I found a Catholic girl. It's happening all over. Whether you want to believe it or not, it is happening. I don't care about your religion. I don't care about your church. This happens everywhere.
Okay, so the argument that she's making against it, all these marital policies, those are correct arguments, and nobody is disregarding the pain of men who have been wrongfully victimized under these circumstances where the incentive structure is completely stacked against them. That is true. However, the benefits of marriage are still unbelievable. It does matter who you marry. To pretend that there is no difference between the person that you marry, that it's happening with Christians and Muslims and it's all the same, that's statistically untrue. There are things that you can do to mitigate against the risk of divorce, and the person that you marry is the chief mitigation.
Okay, first of all, extolling the benefits of marriage like that, 50% end in divorce. If I came to you and told you, I'm going to flip a coin, and if it comes up heads, you get $2 million, and if it comes up tails, I cut off one of your legs at the knee. Is that a risk you're willing to take? Does that really sound like it's worth it? A 50-50 chance that you lose half of one of your legs? $2 million is great, but it just doesn't go that far in this economy anymore. And the other part of this is it is exceedingly hard now to find a woman who is actually qualified to be a wife and mother. I mean, sure, maybe your marriage does last. Does that mean it's happy? Does that mean she's satisfied? Does that mean you're satisfied? Off the top of my head, I can think of 5 married couples that I know in my personal life, and their marriages are on the rocks.
The truth is that in the Jewish community, we always have a backup plan in the sense that every marital contract is a prenup. Every marital contract is a prenup, right? A Jewish ketubah is a prenup. It guarantees certain levels of spousal support, for example. If you give a get, then it makes prior arrangements and all the rest. But one of the throwing out the baby with the bathwater is not the solution. So how about both? How about we revise the system of law? But also, in the meantime, you do need to find a spouse and get married to her.
Oh man, Ben, if only I were like you and I had the luxury of growing up in a conservative religious minority, where the women are socialized and expected to have little to no sexual experience before marriage and also to submit to their husbands. Too bad that's just not the experience of your average American man.
I want to go through some of the stats with regard to the benefits of marriage because I think that it's also possible to exaggerate how bad things are for men. That doesn't mean they aren't really bad for men who end up divorced, or that women aren't divorcing men at an incredibly high rate overall, or that women aren't initiating the vast majority of divorce. Like, again, I agree with many of the critiques of current marital law. I agree with a lot of that stuff.
The Tradcon movement and the red pill are really two different expressions of masculine interests, of men's collective interests. The issue with the Tradcon position is that you're gonna have to start winning the culture, winning legal battles, overturning these structural incentives that women have to initiate divorces, to take men's money and children away from them, in order to make the institution of marriage appealing again. And this means taking the Tradcon position beyond just being some mainstream, watered-down, Cold War ideological distinction. It's got to be more robust. It's got to be more positive. It has to argue positively. It can't just stand against wokeness. It has to argue positively, unequivocally for men's collective interests, not just invoke nostalgia. It's got to change if it wants to garner men's support.
The problem is that when you take it so far that you say that the solution for men is to not get married, now what you have done is you've created a second order effect where unmarried men become actual menaces. Okay, the reality is that men channel their aggressive drives toward building, or they channel it toward destroying. And a system in which women are unmarried and men are unmarried, that's something that the left wants. And if you acquiesce in that, then you actually end up destroying the very fundamental basis of society that allows for the growing and building of a society beyond the leftist principles.
This is a decent point. We obviously want to maintain civilization. But how do you propose the average man build something, build a life with someone, when chances are she is a leftist sympathizer, a leftist, or even a radical leftist? Now, Ben is a multimillionaire, so he's relatively insulated from this. But nearly all women are a little bit terrible, at least at this point. Only 55% of white women even voted for Trump, as an example. The largest, most conservative ethnic group in this country, and basically half the women are still Biden voters. You got to admit it's not looking good. The materials most men have to work with are not looking good.
My answer to Pearl is both and. But yes, get married, and also we should work to change those laws. But by the way that we date has an effect on how we get married and who we get married to. I mean, when I dated my wife, we went in knowing as we began to date that we were not going to sleep together until we were married. We knew for a fact that we were going to have long conversations about things that mattered.
How many Mennonites are there? Just out of curiosity. Again, this is not feasible for your average man. There are not just droves of women out there who are committed to stuff like this. Your average woman doesn't even believe that she needs to obey and submit to her husband. She thinks she's equal to him. And chances are, she doesn't even think she needs a man in the first place.
And this is, by the way, the best available data suggests that this is how you end up with a tangible, durable marriage that lasts a very long time, is that everybody has to be committed going in. That value, when you put values at the center of dating, that obviously doesn't mean that you're going to be impervious to the possibility of divorce, but it does mean that your chances of divorce are really a lot lower, a lot lower.
Women do not hold these values. They think they can just go on Tinder, go on Hinge, go on Bumble, swipe through a bunch of guys, and then eventually they'll find Mr. Right. They have this shotgun approach. But at the end of it, no one wants them. You wouldn't want to eat a sandwich that's been thrown on the ground 15 times. Much less would you want to begin a marriage with a woman who watches the Mean Girl podcast.
Now, I don't want to rip on Pearl here, and I don't think I am ripping on Pearl, frankly. But there are a bunch of other people who are making similar claims. So, for example, Brian Atlas was on the Whatever podcast, and here he was talking about marriage.
Would you consider a prenup?
Prenups are regularly thrown out all the time. They're typically non-enforceable, especially the longer the marriage goes on, the less likely they are to be enforced. Men get absolutely destroyed in marriage and in divorce. Financially, when it comes to the kids, women are more likely to get custody. And then also, if you do get a divorce, the financial cost of just getting the attorney, getting all that involved. If it's a contested divorce, you're going to spend mid 5 figures, 6 figures on attorneys. And you got to pay for her attorney too. 50% of marriages end in divorce. 80% of divorces are initiated by women. 90% if she's college educated. 90% of child support payments go from men to women. 97% of alimony payments go from men to women. You know, you have no fault divorce. So a woman can cheat on you. She can still get half her shit.
Okay. Again, a lot of what he's saying is true. The stats on marriage are not completely true. I'll go through those in just 1 second. Again, the rip on the divorce law is a good rip. It is a fine rip. And the answer is not for men to avoid marriage. The answer is for men to find a good woman to get married to who is committed to values. Yes, of course, marriage is a risk. Of course it is. And that risk is disproportionately borne by men at this point. That is true also. But is the reward worth the risk? The answer, in a huge majority of circumstances where both people are committed, like say, share Christian values, for example, the risk is worth it, is the basic principle. And again, these arguments are made not just by people like this. Andrew Tate has made the same sorts of arguments. Here's Andrew Tate talking about how men don't benefit from marriage.
I think it's a fantastic environment, and I think in an idealistic world, that's the way it would be. I think the reason it's not happening today is that I don't think many men actually benefit from marriages or relationships anymore. And people are always going to have to require some degree of incentive. I think that we've set up the world now in a way where men are seen as worker droids. They're expected to go work all day, come home, clean up as well, share the cleaning with the woman, no meal prepared for them, not have any authority over the household, and just be a worker droid and be a sad. And I don't think that many people understand that men are intrinsically wired to desire respect amongst our peers and in our environments. This is why CEOs work so hard, because they get respect in their company.
Okay, so again, I don't disagree with much of what he is saying, but the solution, very often with the red pill kind of movement, the diagnosis is correct and the solution is wrong.
Now I'll preface this by saying I don't believe Ben Shapiro really cares one way or the other about the red pill. I think Ben Shapiro doesn't totally understand why the red pill is important. The red pill talks about improving men's lives in a way that no other social movement today does. And another reason he doesn't get it is because he's part of the top 1%. He's a multimillionaire. And so the average man's experiences are not relatable to him. But before all other things, he is a businessman. He follows money. He follows attention. He knows all eyes are on the red pill right now. He is a fantastic meta strategist. I don't agree with him on a lot of things. In fact, I think a lot of the things he stands for are reprehensible. But credit where credit is due, he is a fantastic tactician. And he knows he wants every man between the ages of 16 and 25 watching this video. It's all about generating clicks. Remember when he covered WAP? And that was like a meme. That was so funny. He knew that was a meme. That's why he did that. And you'll notice all throughout this video, he's basically making tons of concessions to the red pill.
The reason, by the way, that Pearl and the rest of the red pill movement think the way they do is because of arguments like the one that a person named Destiny makes with Pearl in this particular clip.
Women out earning men have a hard time respecting the men they're with.
That's not true.
That's not true. I read into that data and it explained why. A lot of the time, the women reported that they were expected to be in charge of the household duties and still work a job. And they had to...
Oh, come on. What % of modern women actually cook? I'm just saying this shit's automated nowadays. I mean, you have a washing machine, a dishwasher.
Yeah, but
Sure, you can say, but even at that, but as much as it's automated, men still don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it.
They still don't do it. That's the issue. Is that one of the big problems with households?
For divorce?
It absolutely is a reason.
Chores?
When you get older and you manage a household on your own, Pearl, you'll see how f***ing annoying it is when you're working and then you come home and everything is f***ing have been horrible and nobody's fucking cleaning anything. Yeah, that is a totally valid reason for divorce, of course.
Chores, to break up a home,
Pearl,
a family.
have you lived in a filthy home before? Like, it's so funny because like lifelong friends from like grade school to high school will dorm in college and then hate each other forever over like bad dorm roommates, and that's not even a relationship. So yeah, of course I think stuff like this is perfectly valid. I think splitting up duties in the household is like one of the most important parts of like a relationship, because it's where you're spending most of the time together. This is why I say, people get triggered when I say, I don't think you're even dating until you live together, because until you live together, you don't really know who the other person's like. And once you start living together and you see what the household duties are like, then you get a feel for what the relationship is.
So what Destiny is saying here is totally crazy. Okay, the idea that you get divorced, let's say you have kids, you get divorced because you can't split up who handles the dishwasher is nuts. And comparing marriage to roommates, college roommates, yes, because you don't expect to be roommates with your roommate for the rest of your life and have children with them, generally speaking.
I don't like Ben Shapiro. I don't like a lot of what he stands for, but I hate Destiny so much more. And Ben is spot on with this. Destiny is insane.
A marriage is not supposed to be a contractual arrangement that is purely about who shares household duties. It's supposed to be about building a household. So it's that attitude toward divorce that is making the red pill crew basically say, okay, well, if that's your version of marriage, then I'm not in. I agree. If that were my version of marriage, I would not be in. The point that I'm making is that that shouldn't be anybody's version of marriage. Just like the current version of divorce shouldn't be anybody's version of divorce.
Yeah, and if I had wheels, I'd be a wagon, Ben. This is the modern definition of marriage. This is the modern definition of divorce. Trad women don't just exist in colonies out in the wild. Half the time when you see a woman repeating trad talking points, it's because she's a grifter, she wants male attention, and that's why she's saying something men will want to hear, or she has a boyfriend and she's being influenced by her boyfriend. Your average woman is not naturally conservative, does not naturally hold these values, and going, oh, well, just pick a better partner. One ignores the fact that, again, men are struggling to pick partners. Something like 1 in 3 men hasn't even had relations with a woman in the past year. And a good woman is hard to find.
And I want to give you some stats that demonstrate that not all marriages are created equal. Not all predicates for marriage are the same. So Brad Wilcox, who is a social science scholar on all of this, he has a book called Get Married, and it's all about marriage and divorce. And here are some of the facts in that book that are well substantiated by the data. The number one factor in predicting a high-quality marriage is perceived partner commitment. If you believe that your partner is deeply committed to the marriage, you will be deeply committed to the marriage, which is one of the reasons why it really matters how you date. It really, really matters how you date. So I agree that in a context where you're picking up a girl at a bar and then you live together and then you get married to her, that's a very risky situation. You put yourself in a situation that is very risky, but that is not how I've ever recommended dating. That is not ever how I've recommended getting married. It is all part of a holistic view of how male-female relationships work.
Did you know that something like 50% of young people are on dating apps? That's high risk. There is a massive system of incentives that encourages you to be on a dating app, that encourages your dating life to be decided by some algorithm, your dating success and chances as a man. Mainstream conservatives and Tradcons will have to come up with solutions to these problems if they want men's support. This is a two-way street. You can't just come in here moralizing and making demands. And Ben hasn't so much moralized in this video. I'll give him credit for that. But he is making demands.
Women who attend church are 50% less likely to divorce. For example, so when you heard Pearl earlier talk about, for example, I've seen Christian women do, I've seen Muslim women. Yes, but the question is likelihood. You can always find somebody in any group who does X, Y, or Z. The question is, how often does that happen? How do you mitigate your risk?
And those odds still aren't good enough. I go into a church and I see a lot of derelict people these days. I'm a follower of Jesus. I love Christ. But I go into the average church in my area and there are still very serious problems with the culture there. There's no social cohesion. There's no cultural cohesion anymore. Plenty of women also are willing to claim to be Christian, pretend to be Christian, say they've found God, etc., just because they think it will give them easier access to men who they believe will commit to them. A lot of these so-called trad Christian women are just chameleons. They don't believe in submitting to their husbands. They don't believe in biblical patriarchy. Tradcons need to tell even so-called conservative women that they need to shape up.
As far as the stat that 50% of marriages end in divorce, just about 40% right now of first marriages end in divorce, which is way, way too high. It's also down significantly since the 1980s. But again, it's not equivalent between groups. College-educated parents' risk of divorce has fallen by about 25% since the 1970s. And here's a good stat. Almost 90% of their children for college-educated parents are being raised in married, largely intact families today. So it turns out that there is actually a formula to a successful marriage. It tends to be conservative, religious, highly educated. Those would be like the biggest things that are going to affect whether you end up staying married or whether you end up divorced.
And yet women on college campuses are some of the most liberal on the entire planet, if not the most liberal on the face of the earth. Also, good luck to all the people who can't afford to go to college, am I right?
By the way, another factor that ends up determining whether you stay married or end up divorced is, again, about the nature of the marriage. Do you have kids? Marriages with kids divorce far less often than marriages without kids. In fact, the divorce rate for couples with kids is about 40% lower than the divorce rate for couples without kids, which makes sense because you have less investment. Once you have kids, then actually it damages another party for you to get divorced over the dishwasher.
I think it's safe to say that most people in the red pill space do or would want children with a qualified woman, provided the fact that she is qualified to be a wife and mother.
And then somebody else pays for your crimes at that point. 77% of college-educated conservative parents are still in their first marriage. So are 70% of moderates and 68% of liberals. And again, the number of newly divorced people per 1,000 married Americans has declined pretty markedly since the 80s. It was 22.6 in 1980. It is 13.6 today in 2021. As far as the notion that it's like damaging financially for men to get married, no, it's damaging for men to get divorced. It's not damaging for men to get married. Married men in their 30s earn about $95,000. If they're cohabiting, they earn about $68,000. If they're single, they earn about $42,000.
Does Ben Shapiro remind anyone of Mandark at all?
Again, I think what people are actually arguing about over here, to be fair to the red pill crew, I think what they're actually arguing about is divorce. And so the question is, are you more likely to stay married or are you more likely to end up in a divorce situation? And that is a fair question depending on the process that you use for dating, in the cultural milieu in which you live.
Yeah, and unfortunately for a lot of men, there are very few processes, and there's only one milieu. It's a liberal one, and it's borderline inescapable. It's saturated this culture. It's practically omnipresent.
In the community where I live, an Orthodox Jewish community, not a lot of divorce. Like very, very low divorce rates. Why? Well, because everyone is religiously committed. Because everybody goes into marriage believing it is a sacred bond that actually matters. Because people don't date for sex. People actually date looking forward to the day when they will have kids together. Because every family in my neighborhood has 4+ kids.
Most Americans probably don't even know what a yeshiva is and don't have some sort of analogous institution to Hebrew school for their kids to be educated in their history, their worldview, general outlook, cultural values, reasons why they shouldn't engage in thought behavior. Some of the points Ben has made are decent, and I think there is a future for the red pill to work together with Tradcons. They have a common goal, ultimately. But this is really a tone-deaf response. The rest of America doesn't have these institutions to properly educate their children, to generate social and cultural cohesion. Ben is speaking from a place of privilege here.
Those are the preconditions. But if the idea here is that your basic binary is, are you going to be married or divorced? Divorced is typically worse than never married. And married is way better than both divorced and never married. And so, yeah, it's a risk. But is it a coin flip? I don't think it's a coin flip. I think it is a decision that you have to make as to what kind of person you wish to date, how you wish to date that person, what kind of relationship.
That's the issue, though. It is a coin flip. And these two communities may be at loggerheads until Ben and other Tradcons are able to recognize this. Ben is right. There are certain things a man can do to mitigate the risk of divorce, although he should really be giving a lot more extensive, comprehensive advice on this subject to win over people in the red pill. In this video, he was really just naming stats that make it statistically less likely that you'll get divorced, statistically more likely that your marriage will be stable. What about all the people who are 30 plus, who can't go to college, or in their mid to late 20s, or who simply can't afford it in general? That's just not in the cards for them. What do they do? And we'll see how this dialogue unfolds, because I believe it has the potential to be quite productive. Now that these large figures who are usually focused on broader societal problems have turned their focus to the raw, visceral, emotional experience of the average man, I think this is going to go somewhere. I don't know where. I don't know when. We'll have to see how it turns out, but This is interesting. This whole conversation is interesting to me.
You wish to build and how seriously you take that commitment in the first place. Do the laws need to change? Absolutely, and they need to change. They're garbage. I totally agree with that. It is easy for men to be victimized under these circumstances. It's so easy that you should not enter the risk. Let's look at some of the upsides and the downsides. Here's a chart from Brad about opioid overdose deaths by gender, educational attainment, and marital status. And what you see is that among men, if you are single, never married, what you see is that the opioid overdoses per 100,000 age 25 plus, it's like 25 for single, never married men. It is even higher for divorced men. And it is extremely low for married men. Really, really low for married men. And again, are you going to be one of the people who gets divorced or not? One of the things you can know going in is you will never get divorced. And then you have to make sure that you marry a woman who will never get divorced. And we can't pretend that divorce sort of falls on you like rain from the heavens. That's not right. The person this is why I give dating advice all the time. My number one dating advice, date for values. Date for values. In the end, that's the only thing that's going to remain.
Then we need to figure out how to make women have better values. To have non-thought, radical leftist values. That is task number one. For all men who do not want to date a 304, or who do not want their sons to struggle with dating a 304. I want a son. I want a family in the future. And I want to fight for a future where my son doesn't have to deal with these problems. Are Ben Shapiro and Conservative Inc. willing to step up to the plate? We'll have to see. They're going to have to put their money where their mouth is. We'll have to actually see how much they care about our future. How bad they actually want Western civilization to last if they want the average man's help. We'll have to see. We'll have to wait and find out because this story has yet to be written. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Please share it. That's the most important way that you can support this channel. And Red Channels will catch you in the next one.